So when Paul first started on it, I think you had identified close to $1.3 million, $1.4 million that was there, but has since found a number of expenses that go back to 2007, 8, and 9, and 10 that could have legitimately been written off to there instead of the general fund itself. So we backed those out, made corrections on those, which is what has caused that fund to go down from that $1.4 million down to the $600,000 that it's at now. So a little bit complicated, but who knows what the exact reasonings were, but both of those were basically swept into the general fund reserves last year by the budget preparation that the former administration put together. So this is just moving that portion of them back. Any other questions on the whole supplemental budget in the two ordinances that will be coming forward on Monday? No. Okay, Mr. Lewis, why don't you come up and join us at the table? Mr. Scott, you wanna? I think you're gonna take the first portion of this. What you have before you, and we've been kind of careful to label this accordingly as draft preliminary, very preliminary, including some information that we got Friday and doing some additional work today on some information from the assessor's office on assessed valuations and that type of stuff that we didn't even have when we started putting this together yet. What we want to do tonight is walk you through kind of the initial snapshot of where we believe the budgets are going to be, and then between now and the next month we'll be refining those as final information starts coming through, better information in regards to sales tax revenues, that type of stuff from department heads, and being able to do that with an awful lot of help from Paul. I did in the initial budget message give you some highlights of changes from years past into this budget for 2011, and I think as we go through departments, areas, and the flow of the budget itself, we're going to touch on all of those there. Dave?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Our agenda for this presentation is already started. The Mayor just briefly touched on his message. Again, just to emphasize, it's a draft preliminary message, and some of that messaging will change depending upon information as it finalizes over the next month or so. But the first part, in terms of the meat of the presentation, will be an update on economic data, an update from our last session together on the budget on July 31st, so we have a couple more months of data to share with you. Then we will get into kind of the overarching approach that was taken in the preparation of the draft preliminary budget. Then we'll get into a little bit more detail in terms of the estimates for our draft preliminary budget for 2011, and then we'll walk through the next steps that will culminate in public hearings and action by the council. With that, for the economic data update, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave mentioned, what we wanted to do is give you an update on the economic data that we provided to you on July 31st, and most of this information is just updates to the same slides. And as before, this is really context for your 2011 budget estimates, and also context as we begin developing the preliminary budget in its final form. This first slide, on slide 4, is the same Federal Reserve Economic Index. This is the Federal Reserve Board's Washington State Economic Index, and this shows the information from January 2008 through July 2010. The bars and the left-hand axis are the index value, the line and the right-hand axis are the percentage changes for each month. And as we mentioned before in July, this represents 4 economic pieces of economic data, and it's intended to mirror the change in the state's gross domestic product. Okay, so that's what the index value is intended. Oh, go back. You gotta. The data that we added in represents June and July, and you can see over to the far right, the index value in July was 153.2. Actually, the first month that we've had an increase over the year ago prior month, You see July 2009 at 152.7. However, as we talked about before, the recovery here has been fairly slow. You can see a 0.2% increase over the prior month in terms of the state GDP. The increase is decelerating since April of this year. So again, as we talked about before, a slower recovery. Just in context for the national data, if you were reading the business pages, you might have noticed that the National Bureau of Economic Research called the end of the recession in June of 2009. It represented the longest recession since World War II, 18 months. The Washington State GDP didn't enter into recession, entered into recession later, and is recovering later as well. If you wanted to call the end of this recession using this data, it would be in the March-April 2010 standpoint. Again, a fairly long recession. If you went back to 2001, 2002, that recession was 8 months. So more than double the length of the most recent recession that we've experienced in any event. And as with the national level, the state economy is still lagging in terms of both housing and employment. Two important sectors continue to lag. And the next slide gives you some information on the Clark County employment and unemployment rate. So this slide, the bars in the left-hand axis show the number of jobs in in Clark County. The line in the right-hand axis is the unemployment rate, which takes into account the full labor force and those that are working over in Oregon, whereas the red bars in the left-hand axis are just the jobs within the confines of Clark County. And you can see in August 2010, which is the most recent data we have available, 125,600 jobs compared to 127,600 a year ago and 133,400 2 years ago. And you can see the unemployment rate going from 7.7% 2 years ago to 13.4%, still staying above 13, down from the peak of 15.2, but increasing the last couple of months up to 13.9%. In August. When I showed you the same slide in July, there was a little bit more optimism. You can see the numbers through April through June, steadily increasing employment, and then with July and August, a fairly significant reduction in terms of the number of jobs. Again, lots of theories, one being the expiration of the housing tax credit, some of the construction employment potentially. I haven't dissected these to a large degree, but 7,800 fewer jobs since 2008. That's roughly 6%. That's a real drop in terms of economic activity in the community. So, on the better news side, I don't know if this is completely good news, but on the better news side, this is the initial unemployment claims, again, January 2008 through August 2010, and this is just the number of new unemployment claims in each month. And you can see August 2010, it's fairly stable the last couple of months, down a little bit, and fairly comparable to the pre-recession numbers in the 2000 range, maybe a little bit higher, but there haven't been a rash of new claims for unemployment. The national economic data suggests that new job creation is just keeping pace with the new people that are entering the workforce, and this would suggest the same, that there aren't a whole lot of new layoffs, but there isn't enough employment being created to reduce the unemployment rate, create new jobs. Okay. This next slide is the median sales price and number